This week we've got some Italian style meatballs on polenta with tomato sauce. And true to my style, I'm going to whip up an Italian seasoning that we'll use throughout this dish. So let's get to it. Fire up some pans. We'll start with a pound of ground beef and a bit of pork sausage, some Sicilian breadcrumbs, some dried onion, bit of dried parsley, some rosemary, and a little bit of liquid smoke. Got my Italian seasoning and a little oregano basil thyme mix. Crush that between your palms to get the oils to release the flavors. A little bit of Greek seasoning and some evaporated milk. Bit of powdered egg mix. I also threw in some Parmesan and some mozzarella, but I didn't get that on camera. And we'll mix that up. It's good to wet down your hands first so the meat won't stick. And then just form that into balls. A little bit of fresh ground breadcrumbs with a little bit of seasoning in them, and a little bit of seasoned flour. Just a little of my Italian seasoning in both of those. Then just roll those around to coat, and then also work it in, patty it in. You can go lighter or heavier on the breadcrumbs. Usually I go a little heavier, but I just went a little lighter today. I was just feeling like trying it that way. With a little cracker meal on the meatballs, and I've got a little bacon grease in a hot pan with a little olive oil. And just roll those around to coat them in the cracker meal. We'll gently turn those when they start browning really well on one side. We'll chop some onion and celery to toss onto the cooking meatballs to start building our sauce. You can see some good caramelization going on the meatballs there. Alright, we'll use a little bit of white vinegar and some balsamic vinegar to deglaze the pan, and then we'll just reduce that down. A little red wine would be good too, but I was out. We'll shot a liquid smoke. Bit of garlic powder and a little bit of my Italian seasoning. Now I've got some fire roasted diced tomatoes. I'm just going to give those a little pulse with a stick blender. So then we've got a nice chunky base for our sauce. And we'll throw a bay leaf in there. A bit of ground rosemary and some dried parsley. We'll let this simmer for a bit. Add a little bit of my seasoning. This is some pizza sauce that I had left over. And a little bit of beef broth. Now we'll get to work on the polenta. So we've got a hot pan working there. We'll start with about 2 cups of polenta. About a 1/4 cup of blue cornmeal. And we'll let that toast really bring out the flavors. That right there is smelling really good. A little granulated garlic. A little bit more of my seasoning mix. Some sage. A little rosemary. Now that is bringing the neighbors by. A little bit of dried parsley. And we'll remove that to a bowl. So add some evaporated milk to the pan. Some beef broth. A little bit of Italian seasoning, some garlic, crush up some oregano, some rosemary, and a little bit of liquid smoke. So this is nice and hot now, and we'll stream in our polenta so it doesn't lump. Just whisk and stream in. It's really simple. If it seems a little too thick, add a little water or some stock. A bit of mozzarella. And some Parmesan, and mix that in well. A little bit of fresh ground pepper on the meatballs and sauce too. We'll just spoon some polenta into the serving dish. Top it with a meatball. Spoon a little sauce over that. A little more mozzarella. Sprinkle of Parmesan. A little bit of bread and we're good to go. Alright, that's the meatballs and polenta. I hope you give that a try. It's really simple. It's very tasty. Excellent dish. You can use that Italian seasoning and all kinds of stuff. We'll do a spaghetti sauce with it later on. The blue cornmeal that I added is just an extra flavor. It's totally optional. I happen to have some and I really like how it works in the polenta. You'll notice yet again I toast the polenta before I cook it off. I really like the flavor that gives. Anytime you can add more flavor to a dish, that's what we're here for. You also notice I use my seasoning blend, which is toasted, and then I add a lot of the same seasonings untoasted into the dish. You'll also notice I use some pre-made breadcrumbs, which I tend to not like to do, but I had them on hand and it was really easy. And I also used a little bit of breadcrumbs that I whipped up at the time I needed them. I prefer to make breadcrumbs as I need them. I happen to have the others, so I went ahead and used them. In case you haven't made any, breadcrumbs are really easy. I tend to cut off the crust and cube up the bread, let it dry, and then run it through a spice mill or a food processor, and just even a blender works. I hope you give this dish a try. It's really tasty. It's a lot of fun to make. You can make smaller meatballs, throw them in some spaghetti sauce and use them that way. It's really good on the polenta. You could also make a really good meatball sandwich with these. Till next time, thanks for watching. This is my Italian seasoning. I use this like all my other seasonings for many dishes. So we start with a hot pan, 2 tablespoons of dried oregano, tablespoon of rosemary, teaspoon of fennel, teaspoon of basil, teaspoon of thyme, teaspoon of marjoram, some granulated garlic, about a teaspoon of that, teaspoon of onion powder, some crushed red chili flakes, about a teaspoon, and about a teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper. I'd normally use lavender too. I didn't happen to have any at this time. About a teaspoon or two of dried lavender. Grind that in a spice mill. And then I added a teaspoon of savory and about 2 teaspoons of dried parsley flakes.